Many of you have probably heard of the Keeling Curve and possibly even the remote station in Hawaii from which data was collected to support the findings of this curve. And this Keeling Curve is named after Charles Keeling. He was an American geochemist and oceanographer. He built on the findings of scientists we spoke about earlier, Seuss and Revelle. And what he did was in the late 1950s, he began taking atmospheric carbon dioxide measurements from the top of the volcano Mauna Loa on the island of Hawaii. And the reason he chose this location was because it's very remote, and so it's not impacted by urban areas where CO2 is being emitted, and that would cause many more fluctuations in the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. And so this removed the local effect of CO2 and looks more at a global level of CO2 in the atmosphere. So this is the most current or up-to-date, as of the day of this lecture, graph of the carbon dioxide concentration from Mauna Loa Observatory. And you can see in this graph, the station has provided data for carbon dioxide concentrations in our atmosphere since 1958, continuously up until the present day. So this is a wonderfully robust data set. It's very large and continuous. And what's striking about this curve is that it's relating CO2 levels on this axis over time. And so it's showing how they have increased over time and fairly consistently. Many people wonder what's going on in this graph. Why do we have these up and down? So what are these peaks and valleys in the graph? So it is a steady rise in CO2, but you notice that there's a peak and a valley each year. And the reason, and this is a pattern, the reason we see this pattern is that plants also influence carbon dioxide cycling in addition to human activity. And so plants, when they're dormant in the winter, they're not taking up CO2 and converting it into sugars and forming new plant tissue. And so at that time, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere rebound. And then when plants start to consume that CO2, the carbon dioxide levels will start to decrease as the plants take up the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. Charles Keeling, he's no longer alive, but his son and others researchers at Scripps University continue his work, and they're using the same monitoring station that has been used since the beginning of the Keeling curve to look at CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And for a while there was, I'm sorry, it's not Scripps University, Scripps Institute of Oceanography. For a while there's concern about whether the funding will continue for this observatory, and indeed they are trying to look for some crowdsourced funding because federal sources of funding are starting to dry up. Okay, so if you couple this with some research that came from James Hansen and his team at NASA, they were able to look at the temperature of the ocean over time over the last 100 plus years. And they also saw that the increase in the temperature in the oceans mirrored the increase in the CO2 levels in the atmosphere. And so he was able to plot ocean temperature over time, and he plotted on this graph volcanoes whenever there was a very large volcanic eruption. And the reason he did this was because whenever there's a volcanic eruption, the ash from the volcano can block out sunlight, and it can cause regional, or if it's a large volcano, global cooling for one or many years, depending on the size of the eruption. And so he was showing there's a volcano here, and we see a decrease in temperature, starts to rebound, and there's another when there's another eruption, we see a big decrease, rebounds. And so you can see over time that the volcanoes do influence temperature. It's not always an immediate effect and somewhat complicated, but they can cause some temporary cooling. But then there's a rebound, and so we see that consistently since the industrialization era. we see an increase in ocean temperatures, which mirrors that increase in CO2 over the same period. So from approximately 1960 into the 2000s.